Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. I'm your host, Dave West, here at Scrum.org. Today's podcast is focused on an experience report. Actually, people using Scrum and Agile and Kanban in the real world, not that it ever happens outside the real world, but we have the opportunity today to talk about Bio and their journey, which I'm really interested in. Obviously, from Boston, we have a huge biotech community here, and I get the opportunity to talk to people in this field all the time. So I'm really excited that we have a few people to talk about this journey. We have Andrea Nisbet, Head of People, Kirsty McCarthy, CEO, and we have the PST that helped them, Yuval Yeret, here as well, to keep us all on track and honest, and maybe use some liberating structures or something if we run out of steam. So thank you for joining me today, everyone.
Good to be
You're
here.
welcome. Delighted to be here. Yeah.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Great, thank you. So I guess it'd be really nice, quickly, just to do a quick round robin to where you're all talking to us from. Andrea, where are you phoning in from today?
I'm in Hampshire in the United Kingdom. So,
it's a beautiful part of the world, Andrea. And Kirsty?
I'm in Oxford in the UK, but clearly from my accent, I'm not from the UK. I don't have the Queen's English, so I'm Australian, but living in Oxford.
So again, another amazing place. And Yuval, where can our listeners expect to hear you from?
I'm based in Newton, Massachusetts, and from the accent, you can probably tell that I'm not from here either.
And obviously from my accent, I'm not from Boston as well. So that's a confusing group. There's only Andrea that actually is it true to her accent, as it were. So thanks for joining me. So let's get going and talk a little bit about. Actually, I'd love, Kirsty, if you can kick this off really, and talk a little bit about you and your journey, Bio, how it sort of came about, and really sort of find out for our listeners what the sort of context for this change was.
Sure. So I founded Bio with my husband, Tom McCarthy. So Tom and I were in the US in 2015, and it had just sold a biotech to one of the big pharmas. So Tom was the CEO of that company and had sold, and we were deciding what to do next. So Tom had a lot of experience in biotech. My background has actually been in tech, so commercializing intellectual property around machine learning, artificial intelligence in the early days. So we're in the US saying, we want to stay in the Northern Hemisphere. What do we want to do? And we were both passionate to do something that actually exploited all our experience, to build companies where every company doesn't make the same mistake again. So because what we'd seen was, all these different biotechs, and they're making the same mistakes, and even IT companies making the same mistakes. So how do we create an ecosystem of biotechs where we can learn from each other, where we can actually share resources, share learning, share experiences, so that we become more efficient, ultimately, so that we can get, drugs to people faster, so we can improve lives. And we thought that was really sitting somewhere between big pharma, and have lots of resources, really slow, and single asset biotech, really nimble and fast, but really don't have access to that, to resources and shared learnings. So what we want to do is create an ecosystem that sat between those two things. And so that's where Bio came from. And with the vision to actually set up biotech companies that could be nimble and fast, but have access to learnings and shared resources.
So a bit like an incubator, if that's the right word to describe it.
Probably we extend on the incubator model in that we're co-located. So all the companies at the moment are located in Oxford. You know, new companies will be located in different places. But so we all sit next to each other, and we're actually there for the journey. An incubator traditionally is providing support at an early stage and said, here you go on into the world and be successful. But we're actually together for the whole journey from a biotech. So from that early discovery stage through translation and into the clinic, because we think there are different skills and different learnings at each stage of that evolution.
That's super interesting. And so when you look at your portfolio, would you call that a portfolio of companies that you're looking after? When you're looking at those, tell me a little bit about how you help them. You know, what is the product? And a little bit more about the product space. Is it a particular stream of biotech and machine learning, or is it all over the place?
The three companies that are currently in the pod, as we're calling it, so three companies. So they're actually Grey Wolf Therapeutics, Pathos Therapeutics, and 35 Bio are three companies sitting in Oxford. They all happen to be in oncology and immuno-oncology, which means they get to share learnings across that, that therapeutic area. They're actually all small molecule companies, which might mean things to biotechs, maybe not to other people. But again, the heads of chemistry from each of the company can share learnings and experiences in how you actually develop a small molecule to treat these diseases or to hit these targets. So yeah, we share learnings across the whole journey and in all aspects of drug discovery and development.
Okay, that sounds amazing, and obviously well needed. You know, as every year I get a little bit older, and I sort of feel like my body is not necessarily as good as it was. So really do appreciate all the work you're doing. Let's think a little bit about Agile and Scrum and how that fits in. So I understand it from a sort of like this idea that you're creating this portfolio of organizations, shared learning, everybody's helping each other. You're hopefully getting some shared services, shared ideas, sharing intellectual capital, etc. But how does Agile and Scrum fit into this? Andrea, maybe you can share a little bit.
Yeah, great, happy to. So we actually think that Agile is a perfect match for drug discovery because you have this unknown endpoint and you need to be able to pivot really quickly based on the data that you're receiving as you're going through the process. So, it can be a bit more challenging, but equally it's really valuable to incorporate at the preclinical and the clinical phases, having that agility. I mean, some of the advantages we found have been faster decision making, increased transparency across the team, and that wider collaboration as well. So some really huge impacts that we've been finding in terms of using Agile in the biotech space.
And so you've helped these portfolio companies, the three portfolio companies that you're working with. You've given them that training, help them to think about the use of Agile and Scrum. Is that how it's worked with your portfolio companies?
Yeah, that's correct. So actually, we did that through Yuval as well. So Yuval, you might want to chip in a minute. But through Scrum.org, we actually came across Yuval, and Yuval was instrumental in doing the initial training with actually everybody who was working in the ecosystem. So we thought it was really important that everybody had that baseline understanding of using Scrum and Agile, and the Kanban approach, so that everyone was talking the same language, understood the same methodologies. Clearly, there will be people that have a greater understanding. Some of our PMO will be using it more in depth, but actually everybody understands the journey. I mean, Yuval, do you want to sort of add anything to that?
Yeah, definitely. The work at MM, was part of the realization that I've had that when you talk about Agile, you're talking about something that's inherent to how scientists are thinking. So being empirical, trying things, that should be natural. And I think that's why at least the principles really resonated for everybody that have been part of our workshops and our training. And I emphasize workshops because it's not as simple as just training people. Here's how you use Scrum or Kanban, go do it. We really emphasize the principles, and we need to really figure out how is that appropriate for us. I mean, we talk about Scrum 30 days or less, working increment, but when you have a molecule that needs to be manufactured by a third party and that process takes time, there's more of a complex value stream to this learning and closing the feedback loop. So it's really interesting how the team and the different teams at Bio manage to take the principles and actually use them in their context by some, useful combination of the principles and practices of Scrum and Kanban.
So scientists can be a little bit skeptical of trying things, and transparency isn't necessarily their natural way of working. I'm not being rude of scientists. They're amazing, and obviously they're changing the world on a minute by minute basis. So how did you get all of these very diverse human beings? Was that to really come at this in a very positive way? Was that a real challenge, or was it relatively easy?
Kirsty, do you want to take that one?
So it was a challenge initially. So we went through a process with Yuval, talking to the team about the advantages and how we might apply it to get the buy-in to actually hold the workshop. And that was the original. As Yuval said, it's more than just one thing. This is a constant learning experience or journey that we're on. So for that first workshop, and then even coming out of that workshop, there were different levels of engagement and enthusiasm for implementing Agile. So then it was a matter of actually just getting going and seeing the impact. So we came away from that first workshop, and we agreed we're going to run 4 pilots. So essentially one per company and one in MM. Different types of projects, so some purely R&D, some less R&D, operational. So we approved those projects, those pilots got going. What we saw was that actually it was almost out of control. So as soon as it got going, people get, oh, actually, that's really useful, that's really interesting. And we actually saw, particularly, I guess, Trello boards and Kanban being adopted across the organization of a whole lot of projects. In hindsight, I think Yuval, what we missed really then, we got the Kanban boards, but we didn't always get the mindset shift. And I think we're still on that journey and really thinking about, well, how do we go back and make sure that we've got the agile mindset, and because to complement, I guess, the operationalizing of this. So again, we're still on the journey, but really it's people have seen the benefits and people have been very engaged. So really it's just pervasive now across the ecosystem.
That's amazing, Kirsty. So tell me a little bit about that mindset thing, because one thing that I saw in a couple of biotechs that I've spent some time with is the idea that what's the minimum we can do to get to that result was perhaps not always the journey that the teams wanted to go on. They wanted to be very diligent. They wanted to do lots of work up front before they got to a certain point. And that was definitely a wrestle. Was that part of the mindset challenge, would you say? Or was it something else?
I think it is. If I answer that question maybe in a slightly different way, in that our project management office now is really coming up with the hybrid methodology to try and address that. So how do we actually combine traditional project management and Agile? And it is actually to address that planning phase up front. So because I think it's in a lot of what we do in biotech, there are particular dates that we have to hit. So, we need to dose a patient in the clinic and that date doesn't move. And there's certainly costs associated with that. So we need to have that high level planning and view. And so how do we work back from that? And then once we've got that clarity, it's then how do we apply Agile to actually execute on that plan? So that's where we've got to with a lot of our R&D projects. We've now adopted this Agile, this hybrid approach where we use both.
So really what you do in the planning is understand what are the constraints, like, hey, a clinical trial, you know, which obviously use a third party, and there's lots of constraints there, contracts, etc. We need to hit those dates. We've got maybe some constraints in manufacture. We've got some constraints here. Making those all very visible and transparent, and then saying, considering these constraints, how do we work? What can we do, as it were? Would that sort of sum it up, Kirsty?
Very much. And very much. And so as soon as you're through that planning phase, you're very much into that, all the great things about Agile, you know, the transparency, that, you know, the focus on, you know, sprint goals, the focus on the really critical things that we need to do to actually hit those outcomes or achieve those outcomes. So yeah, very much.
And what does...
No, sorry, I was just going to add to that and just say I agree with that, and definitely in terms of, you know, sprints and, you know, reviews and planning and the retrospectives, all those things happen, you know, in line with the Agile Kanban approach. So, but it's that initial planning piece that just might be slightly, slightly different, as Kirsty outlined.
Yuval, what from your experience, what do you think?
Yeah, so one thing to add about these hybrid environments that are very common both at biotech and other areas, the planning that I find usually helpful in these environments is both the constraints, as you're saying, but also plan for uncertainties or risk management, whatever language you want to call around it. The question of why do we even need Agile if we do all this planning is a useful question to ask ourselves every time we go into such a project. And it's typically around, okay, we want to work within these constraints, but we also have a lot of uncertainties, especially if we're doing scientific discovery. As we're doing this, we need Agile in order to be able to inspect and adapt within these constraints. And that's both the mindset and the technique that typically helps people trying to figure this out.
So Yuval, you identify those massive unknowns, no, obviously that sounds like a contradiction, but you know what I mean, the areas of uncertainty, the areas of high risk, and you ultimately try to push that left, as we would say in the sort of agile world, try to manage that uncertainty as quickly as possible to do the things that expose those issues and risks earlier. So because that obviously have an impact on downstream activities, clinical trials, manufacture, whatever those things are. Is that's what you're advocating?
More or less. So your backlog, if you want to use the backlog in Scrum, your product backlog would be based off of a mix of execution related items that you know what you need to do, and you might know that you need to do them early on because of lead time, as well as risk-oriented, learning-oriented items, assumptions, maybe even leap of faith assumptions that you want to de-risk as quickly as possible. And it's a tough balance, right? Do I do the things that have a long lead time now? Or do I do the de-risking things now? Because if I don't de-risk them, all of those long lead time items are meaningless. I mean, we won't have something to dose the patient with if we don't find, the right formula. But if we don't get prepared for dosing the patient, it's going to be useless without the ability to actually try it out in vivo, in vitro, whatever you call it. Yeah.
So hang on a minute. And that's one of the biggest issues that we have with adopting Scrum, from my experiences. It makes you have those hard conversations. And that's not necessarily what we want, because many of these are startups, these are young companies. So their resources are very constrained. And now you actually see, okay, well, we can do all this work that we have to do now, which has got long lead time. And we have to also do all this discovery stuff. How do I mix those two together? That must be very interesting for everybody involved.
Yeah. I think it's a really important conversation, and you're right. I mean, the fact that we have those conversations and it's transparent is really valuable, and it's really valuable for our investors and the board, because so we're all VC-backed companies, and if we can be really clear with them saying we have decided to do these things for these reasons, and exactly as Yuval articulated, we've made a decision. We know that there's risk here. We know we've got this lead time. Therefore, based on all the information we have decided to take this course of action. So those conversations are really valuable internally, but also for us in terms of our stakeholders and communicating with our stakeholders.
But doesn't that mean, and I really want to lean into this, I ran a VC-backed, helped run a VC-backed company, and talking to the VCs wasn't necessarily the most enjoyable experience when you were bringing bad news. So sometimes, you know, you would avoid some of that. So do you have to have a different kind of investor with this way of working because of the level of transparency that creates?
We've got great investors. And I think culturally, and Andrea has been key to this, our culture isn't just internal. It's actually the way we'll deal with everyone. It's the way we deal with investors. It's the way we deal with our partners. And that is about transparency, because we build long-term partnerships. And I don't think you can build those long-term partnerships if we aren't transparent and honest and clear about what we're doing.
And the investors understand this kind of approach at a very high level, obviously not some of the detail.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, they're on the journey with us.
Yeah.
That is awesome. That is amazing, because one of the biggest problems I found running we were always very careful what we were transparent about, and sometimes that ended up getting, as you rightly said, getting us into trouble in the long term, because maybe some assumptions were left unchecked in the short term. So it's really, really great that you're working that way. So what does success look like? We're working in this way. We've got the 3 portfolio companies, making things transparent, making that risk, sort of trade-offs at the start, sharing it with our investor and community. What does success really look like? Do you have a clear picture on a sprint by sprint basis, or what does it look like?
I'm happy to start on this, and Kirsty, feel free to add to this. So, we do have Trello Kanban boards for projects, and as we're sprinting. So I think feedback from team members is really positive as well, which we get through the retrospectives and the sprint planning. The achievement of our sprint goals is real success. So I guess a project that I was involved in, which wasn't an R&D project, it was a recruitment project. So as we got Series B in for one of our companies, we needed to increase our headcount by almost doubling our headcount across the ecosystem. So we set that up as an agile project with a Scrum Master supporting us. And success for the team was seeing how much was achieved as we were sprinting. We did actually start using Fibonacci as well to measure how many points. And just every fortnight when we were checking in and the team seeing how much they'd achieved, that's really motivational for them. And especially then when you communicate that, part of it was communicating back out into the business, what was achieved, keeping the stakeholders up to date. I think, just as a very quick stat, we worked out we've done something like 700 interviews and 700 onboarding meetings in a year, so that is success for us. So more satisfaction, celebrating the successes, achieving, and everybody understanding what is happening.
I think that you sort of highlighted Andrea, you highlighted a really interesting sort of outcome of Scrum is you feel continuous success, as opposed to this, it all starts really well and then there's this massive period of unknown, and then it finishes in a chaotic, nightmarish, everybody's running around spinning with their heads up. We sort of keep that constant with a Scrum Agile approach, and that's true of internal projects and also the R&D type projects as well. So,
can I just add to that? I guess it's really hard to compare, I guess, project and projects. We don't have exactly the same. There's no apple and apple.
Yeah.
So what we have done is now we've got some really significant data points. So, when companies have hit particular milestones, because we're on these three companies, again, as I said, oncology, small molecule. So we've been able to measure when they've hit significant milestones, and that might be, candidate nomination for their molecule. It might be, when you get into the clinic. And we've actually shown the data tells us that we actually hit those milestones significantly faster and more cost effectively than industry averages. So although it's really hard to do this on a individual project by project basis, we're seeing now that rolls up into, a significant advantage, a significant change in the way we can actually do this work.
and hopefully, I mean, obviously, unfortunately, science, there's a lot of luck involved, as though we do pretend there isn't. But hopefully that advantage will manifest itself, because as you do this better, faster, get more data on it, then the ultimate, that luck, you start, being able to improve your likelihood of success, and the rest is success for everything. That sounds awesome. That's great. So I guess we're coming up to the end of our. I could talk about this for ages, because it's so interesting, the work that you've been doing, and you're literally changing the world one molecule at a time, which is crazy to say. But if somebody's in a similar position, obviously we're in Boston, I'm in Boston, a lot of biotech type companies, a lot of them experimenting with how they're going to work in these new opportunities and these new programs and projects. If you're in the biotech world and you're listening to this podcast, what would you recommend for them to get started? What would be the thing you would tell them? And I'd love, Andrea, maybe you could start.
I think just give it a go. Now, you need to give it a go, but obviously you need to have a bit of understanding around what that is. And that's where we started, and that's how we came across Scrum.org, and found out what you were doing, and then got connected with Yuval to help us with the workshops and the coaching. But we haven't looked back. So I think, look into it a little bit and just give it a go. You haven't got anything to lose, and you have got so much to gain from doing it.
Thanks, Andrea. Kirsty, what would you leave these people with?
Yeah, the same. Give it a go, pick a few projects. Make sure you do the training, because I think it's that common language is really important and what you're trying to achieve. As I said earlier, I think we're doing a little bit of catch up, I think, in terms of agile mindset, because it was easier for us to implement operationally than to actually then get people to really think about the mindset, which permeates more than just project management. It's actually a mindset across a culture and an organization. So yeah, jump in, but I would say don't forget about the mindset. Really, think about that as you're implementing this.
I think that's really, really great advice. Kirsty, thank you for that. Yuval, last words?
Yeah, as Kirsty is highlighting, the mindset, and for me it's the principles as well are so hard to get in place. It's so easy to jump into operationalizing and the principles, the practices of the day-to-day. What I would say for people in biotech, what I've seen work is start with the principles, start with a pragmatic view of what patterns, what practices make sense in your context, and that's how we started at MM Bio. And don't forget these principles. And from time to time, you do need to get back into a room and reflect back on the principles and the mindset, and ask yourself, why are we using these practices? What really makes sense versus what are some of the things that we just started doing by default and don't really make sense for us. Think about your operating system, the ecosystem that you're providing to the portfolio companies or to your own teams as something that you're inspecting and adapting as well. There's version 1 or 0.1 that you start with. You need to keep inspecting and adapting it.
Never done. That's always, which is always very disappointing. Wouldn't we like to be done? But lots of success along the way on that journey to being never done. It's a bit like the healthy lifestyle that you're meant to adopt in January. It's never done, unfortunately. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea, Kirsty, Yuval. Thanks for spending the time and sharing your journey. It sounds amazing, and I'm going to keep my eye on the internet for many of these portfolio companies as they gain success and help the world in the cancer oncology sort of world, which is such an important one to everybody, I think. Well, thanks for listening. This was the Scrum.org community podcast. Your host, Dave West here, listening to a really interesting experience report from Bio about their journey. And, get going, I think, was have a go, but remember the mindset and remember you're never done, but you can have success along the way. Thanks for listening, as always. And if there's, hopefully in the future, you'll be able to listen to new podcasts, and maybe we'll even hear from Bio as their journey continues. And there's also a big back catalogue of podcasts as well, so feel free to dip into that. Thanks for listening, everybody. Scrum on.